Hi, Sigurd.
Hi, Bob. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's session, the online meditation session to explore the mind together. You might join this session via Zoom or just watch it via YouTube live. No matter where you are, let's just sit together, cross the space at the same time to quieten the mind, to understand the mind a little more. What is meditation? What is guided meditation? Probably there's a mental image you have had about this word, meditation. Some image about some kind of a practice, some discipline, some forms of doing meditation. Also, for the guided meditation, probably some music, Latin music, very relaxing, very soothing, very calm, and some people's words to guide you to focus on the breath or whatever. But have you noticed that? For this talk, in the next 1 hour, where we explore the mind together, try to understand the self a little more. Do you notice that this kind of talk is also a guided meditation? Guided by your observance of the mind. Guided by your listening without the me, the self. So you can listen to the words of the speaker and go beyond it. Most of the time, people are listening to their own thoughts. Through their thoughts, they interpret everything to their own convenience. But if you can just listen to the speaker's words without any sense of the self, which means that without any interpretation, any judgment, any condemnation, any justification, just listen and go beyond the verse to observe the mind. Then this talk won't upgrade to argument. And this talk is purely a guided meditation. Can we make this a guided meditation? Can we? Yes, we can, right? If there's no self, no matter what kind of activities you are doing, it's a meditation, is it? So today, let's still continue this meditation session. Let's continue this dialogue between you and me. It's not to talk about any kind of small things, personal things, all kinds of content of thoughts. We don't talk about that because it's meaningless, is it? It's very, very unimportant. It's nothing to you. Though you hold it though you hold on to it so firmly, believing that that's your whole of your life. But to meditate is to notice that, to deeply feel that the content of thoughts are in any way unimportant. Therefore, it's totally meaningless to hold on to it. You can have it, but there's no point to hold on to it. When you are holding on to that thought, the process of identification starts. Identify yourself with the thought. Then the self, the ego, is built up. Is it? The self, the ego, comes from this process of identification. Thoughts are always in conflict. You may have noticed already in your life. By identify yourself with the thoughts, you as the self is full of conflicts. Is it? No wonder we often say the self is the only source of all kinds of mental conflicts. Because we keep identifying ourselves with the thoughts. So the journey of meditation is to dissociate yourself from the thoughts. Thoughts are very materialistic. Thoughts are not holy at all. The very process of dissociating yourself from thoughts is to empty the self, is to let go of the self. It's the process of seeing the truth. It's the whole essence of meditation. So before we continue today's exploration, explore biases, let's just keep silent for 3 or 4 minutes to quieten down the mind for the whole day. Letting go all the thoughts. Come back to this moment. And then we come back for the exploration. biases? What are biases? The root meaning of this word, bias, comes from Greek, means oblique, slanting. But the word is not the described. So when we ask ourselves, what is a bias? It means what is the described. Bias is not the described. That's why we have to go beyond the word to find out what does bias mean here. It is very often easy to say that we are all biased. Sounds reasonable. But what is bias? Is that really true that everyone is biased? Unconditionally or not? What we usually mean by bias means the view is biased. When we give a view, the view can be biased. Even when we don't give a view, we can still be biased. Because we can talk to ourselves, we can chatter on the mind with a view, which is not expressed to others. Even when we begin to think, that kind of thinking, or the thought, is biased, probably. When we say something is biased, it means that something is no longer neutral. Something is pointed towards a direction. To emphasize something, to ignore something else. When we use the word biased, we probably always associate bias with something not parallel. Something is slanting, something is oblique. Something is not balanced. That's probably this kind of general expression we have had from language. But the challenge for us is how can we go beyond language? Whether this kind of impression really give us the insight or simply just mislead us. When we see something is biased, let's just explore it, not by words, just feel it. It always emphasizes something and ignores something else. Make some part of things striking and just simply cover up the other part. All we can see, we use a small part to represent the whole. That's the bias. If we do this, either consciously or subconsciously, using small part to represent the whole, what does that mean? It means a division. A division, a separation of a small part from the whole, from the totality, and then use a small part to cover up, to represent the whole part. It sounds similar to something. It sounds similar to the self and the totality of the mind. That's it. We always use the small part, which is the self, the ego, to represent, to cover up the whole part of the mind, the totality of the mind. That leads to the bias, doesn't it? Which means that we always deliver an egocentric view. That egocentric view is bias. The self-centered, the egocentric view is very subtle. Very, very subtle. Probably it can be a conclusion, can be a assumption used in your statement. That assumption can be very self-centric, self-centered, but people just don't notice it at all. So, up to now, we have seen that bias is a self point of view. Bias is generated from the center. Where there's a center, there always is a bias. That center is the self. It's the ego. So we have to realize this. If we say we are all biased, it means that we are all living with the self, with the ego, in some all kinds of subtle ways. It implies that we can only live a life with the self. Is that really true or not? If we can only live a life with the self, what's the point for us to have this session here? You may have heard this sentence many, many times. We are all biased. Maybe at one time you feel a little uncomfortable at hearing this. But today, we have found out why this sentence makes us feel uncomfortable. Because there's a bias there, there's an assumption there. You can only live life with the self. Then we have this conclusion: we are all biased. Yes, it is a conclusion, right? Look at our life. From all kinds of media, all kinds of books. How many conclusions have we received subconsciously? And those conclusions has become part of the consciousness, based on which we create more self-centered views. After now, you may ask, what's the problem to give a biased view? I have the freedom to express a view. Therefore, I have the freedom to express a biased view. We may notice that. What's the meaning of this freedom to give a biased view? Look at the politics. All kinds of things the politicians have spoken. The biased views only causes clashes between two or more parties. And you also notice that the clashes only leads to compromise. Only leads to all kinds of bitterness in the daily life. Because when one expresses a view from the self point of view, it just triggers the self from others. Then the two egos clashes. The conflict comes. The problem starts. What's the consequence of that? What's the consequence of this clash leading to the bitterness between people? It leads to more hurt, more division, more isolation, more individuality. That's how thoughts divide people, right? The views cannot be necessarily expressed, but when there's a thought running through the head, the thought is from the center, which is the self. It is already biased. I like this, I dislike that. So the bias is the division itself. And the bias only leads to more and more division. Bias leads to biases. Biases enhance biases. Then some kind of extremity of views appear. Look at this internet era. The views are expressed unprecedented ever. The views are simply mindless. But look at the ramification of this word, because this kind of what we call the freedom of expression. Which is, of course, very ridiculous, but it's so deep-rooted in almost everyone's mind. The freedom of express what? Look at now, for example, in the political world, there's so many far-right views, also so many far-left views. Look at the chaos of the consciousness in this world. To me, it seems to be rather meaningless to do this. Probably people have nothing to do, so they want to have some chaos to entertain themselves. I hope so. So it is very sad that we accept this conclusion that we are all biased. We don't even ask ourselves, is that possible to live a life without the self? It is horrible, isn't it, to simply accept this conclusion without inquiring into the mind to ask ourselves seriously, can I live a life free from the self, free from the ego? Can I really live a life peacefully in this chaotic world? can I? The very act to asking this question seriously probably leads one into the exploration of the mind, to turn inward, to understand what is really going on the mind, what is really wrong with the mind. Why I'm living life always wanting to be told, always wanting to be led, always wanting to receive all kinds of influence and conclusions based on which to build on my life, which must be chaotic and a battlefield. What's the point to living such a biased life? The very essence of meditation is to question this, to really question yourself. Why do you live in this way? You might have noticed that from no matter whichever point you start to question, you can always come back to the very essential question of life: how to live. How can I live life without biases? This question is a denial of the conclusion that we are all biased. You may ask, who said that we are all biased? You may find that you can't find a person, the source, who's saying that, but this kind of rumor is always going around in your life.
Doesn't it sound like an allegation? You're biased, you have preoccupations, etc.
What is allegation?
You charge someone with allegation, you charge someone, you say, I think you are, you've done that, or you think like that. Allegation.
Oh yeah. Sorry, Bob. I misheard the word allegation. Yeah. So where am I?
You said, who was the first person who said, you're biased, everyone is biased? Actually, yeah, I thought then it is like kind of disbelief from one person to another, and I, so, I also think bias is somehow a charge. In what way ever?
Yeah. Yes. Who has created such a conclusion? And why will that this conclusion pollute our consciousness? The very acceptance of that conclusion without any questioning and doubting is the beginning of the pollution of the consciousness, isn't it? Look at all kinds of allegations, all kinds of claims, all kinds of statements. They are done sometimes, or many times, or mostly from the view of the self. You have to realize that. It's important to notice this because this is a part of the meditation, that when the view, which is based on the self, sometimes can be very influential. Have you noticed that some personal stories can easily touch you, to trigger the self, to trigger your sympathy? To trigger your pity for somebody. So when a view is delivered, is made from the point of view of the self, it also has such influence, very strong one sometimes. Because when everyone is running the self, that kind of view is very easy to go around. Unless we observe all of this in solitude, to really live life without the self, we can begin to notice this kind of influence on us, this kind of improper influence on us. So, up to now, you may have noticed that how subtle is it for the biases? How subtle is it for the self? The self can be reflected on many subtle levels of life, which determines that the bias is also very subtle in many ways. So the way you find for yourselves to end the self is the way for yourself to work out of the biases. And this is a part of the meditation. When we have a bias, we can't see the truth, can we? Because when we are biased, when the self is running, the bias becomes the truth. But the truth is not bias. The bias can be understood by people as truth, but the truth itself is not a bias. The truth is the truth. It can only be seen when there's no bias, which means that there's no self. There's no self-centered activities. Which means there's no conflict at all. No conflict, no clashes. Means there's only peace. So a peace of life is a life free from biases. Is it? How peaceful life is depends how you make your life unbiased. So we have explored this topic for about nearly 45 minutes. And now it's time to meditate again, to quieten the mind. We activate the neurons to examine, to find out the truth. And we also need to quieten them down when we don't use them. So we just put the neurons into the right place. This requires the awareness of the totality of the mind to give you the wisdom. Think whenever necessary, and not think whenever not necessary. And now, let's follow the audio guide to empty the consciousness. Nothing really matters, right? Just empty everything to quieten the mind deeply, and then we come back to the session. Now, let's take a 10-minute meditation. Start by taking a moment to find a comfortable position to sit in a posture that you feel relaxed and get alert. Let hands rest on your knees or laps. Let the eyes close gently. Soften your forehead. Act a soft smile in the corner of your lips. Breathe naturally. As you breathe in, be aware that you are breathing in. Feel the sensation of breathing in. The region can be the nostrils, can be the belly, can be anywhere. Focus on the part you feel most As you breathe out, be aware that you are breathing out. Feel the sensation of breathing out. The region can be the nostrils, can be the belly, can be anywhere. Focus on the part you feel most. Fix your attention on the breath. Let go of any thought, words, images. This moment, nothing is more important than breath. While you are listening to the bell, check where your attention is. If it wasn't on the breath, after the bell, gently invite your attention back to the breath and sustain your attention on the breath. Slowly bring your awareness back to this room. Feel into your body. Wiggle your fingers and toes. When you are ready, open your eyes. Great. How time flies. The 1 hour has finished already. And thank you for being here tonight via Zoom and YouTube to watch this session, to join this session together, to explore the mind. Today we have examined this topic of biases. And we find that a piece of life is a life from biases, free from biases. And I hope this spirit of exploration will continue in your life, to examine, to question anything you have inherited, anything you have accepted. Just put it into question. The very questioning it will help you, will lead you to the truth about life. And this journey and meditation is your life. How to meditate means how to live a life. Finally, it's time to say goodbye again each week. All the best for you for the next week, for each day to stay peace, safe, and calm. No matter what happens outside, life should continue in its own routine. A routine where there's no self, there's no ego. A life in solitude, which has nothing to do with isolation, but only in solitude can one find the truth. Okay, everyone.